So this is the fourth issue in Prez, the First Teen President series. And this was when the series was canceled in what's called the DC implosion of the early 1970s, when a whole ton of series were canceled. And so Prez was one of them. There was a fifth issue that was completed, but it wasn't released until later in a book that contained a whole bunch of these canceled comics. And I don't own that one. And as far as I know, as far as I could tell, Prez has never been reprinted. So if you want to read the series, you've got to get the originals. So let me go through it, because I think it's an interesting but ultimately flawed series. So now we have Dracula. So we start off with, there's Prez Rickard and Eagle Free, and they are in this country, Moravia, and seeing the building of a canal, which apparently the U.S. is helping to fund. And so there's one part in here where they're talking about it being a wonderful gift from the United States. And Prez Rickard said, actually, it isn't a gift, Eagle Free. The water will enable Moravia to build up her economy. They will pay us back at the rate of $34.60 per year, which I guess that isn't much. $34.60. Okay, so I guess maybe the point, I kind of read this wrong before. I guess the point is that the amount is so low that it's irrelevant. But a little bit of an interesting thing to say. So he goes back, well, they go to China, and Prez Rickard is so talented that he is able to beat somebody who is Chinese at ping pong. And then, anyway, so this is where the series, it's trying to make a point, I guess, but it gets so weird. So we have this vehicle from Transylvania that comes in, and there is a werewolf. And so the soldiers attack the werewolf, who fights back and then transforms, I guess, into a more human form, although he still has fangs. And so they are not happy because this canal that's being built for the water is taking water from Transylvania. And that's a legitimate issue if you're taking the water from another country. And so it's hard to say in this point, even though Transylvania is shown as being the villain, they have a good point if you're taking the water away. And this is kind of one of the things that countries go to war over. And so he says something about that he is there under the authority of Count Dracula. And so, they're a little bit like, what? That's weird. And so they're talking about actually going to war with Transylvania, and it just, you take their water and then you're going to go to war with them. And just talking about the fact that there are vampires in Transylvania, which is obviously, quite silly. And the Wolfman left a coffin-sized suitcase in the Oval Office, which seems unlikely. And out pops, I guess, Dracula, except he's on I guess he lost his legs below the knees, so he's on this little platform with wheels on it, and it's weird. Like, they never really explain why, other than he says something about how he'd been injured or something, but he did. Why is he on that? It doesn't really. It's just weird. So he attacks Prez Rickard, and Eagle Free comes in there, and so it just becomes just this weird fight. So he says, I have been tormented and crippled. So that's about all it says, is that he was crippled. But there is still enough of me left to destroy you both. And so just fighting with Dracula, and then Dracula jumps up there. And it is funny that Eagle Free being Native American, he uses a Native American symbol rather than a cross. And then Dracula says, "What's this, a Nazi swastika?" And he says, "Wrong, Dracula, this is a cross, the Indian hooked cross. The Great Spirit will strike you down if you advance beyond the sign." So I guess Dracula he's harmed by any religion, I suppose, not just the Christian cross. And he escapes into the plane, and they fly off into the night. And what they have a plan to release deadly vampire bats on the United States. So it says a warplane with a cargo of bats. The bat is infected with rabies, so that's a bit of a problem. And so what Eagle Free decides to do is use his bird friends to do a kamikaze mission. He releases the birds, and their intention is to just clog up the engines with their bodies and cause it to crash. And apparently it is successful. And it sounds like they are... so this it's treated as if they've won the war. And Eagle Free says, "There is one thing left that disturbs me, my Prez. If Transylvania surrenders, do we send American dollars to build her up again, as we have done with our vanquished throughout history?" First of all, the United States has not done that throughout history. They did it with the Marshall Plan after World War II, and so that's probably what they're referring to. But no, the United States has not always built up vanquished countries. And it does seem interesting that by crashing the plane, they have vanquished Transylvania. And then Prez says, "Build up Transylvania, the land of the living dead." So I don't know if in the 5th issue, that's what they're dealing with. And it just seems like, I guess Joe Simon is writing this. It sounds like he's trying to make some kind of point here, but I think it's all muddled, because if Moravia is legitimately stopping up the water from Transylvania, then yeah, Transylvania's got a legitimate grievance. Now, whether Transylvania's best course of action is to have Dracula sneak into the White House and try and kill the president, doesn't seem like a good idea. But I think that also in issue 3, the message was really muddled, because in issue 3, Prez decides he wants to make guns illegal, like not restrict them, but just make them completely illegal. And although it's not really spelled out, it's not spelled out why he wants to do it, what the limitations are, whether it's just every single gun. But then there's an attack on the Capitol by a militia, and they end up calling out the military to protect the Capitol. And then Prez, I guess, has a complete change of heart about guns. But that doesn't really make sense, because the militia, I've never heard anyone saying, let's get rid of all the guns from the military. So the military was the one that stopped the militia. The militia was private citizens with guns. So it's like, what exactly did we learn here? And so he also made it very clear that he learned that violence is sometimes the solution. And it's like, really, is that the message we want to put out there, that sometimes violence is? And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying, is that really the message that the 18-year-old Prez Rickard, is that a message that's going to resonate with a young comic book fan? Or is Joe Simon interjecting some of his own politics in there, which I don't necessarily have a problem with, as long as you can kind of make the message consistent and coherent. And the idea of a country taking the water from another country is an interesting idea, and then throwing in vampires just makes it silly, and then making Transylvania clearly just in the wrong. Again, I don't believe these comics were ever reprinted. But we did have this in 2016, Prez, which was written by Mark Russell, who I like Mark Russell. I think he's a good writer. I read it and I enjoyed it, and I cannot remember hardly anything about it. I need to read it again. But I do think that I think that Mark Russell probably had a more coherent message than whatever Joe Simon was attempting to do here. I thought it was a series with a lot of potential that was kind of squandered and got very silly. And I would love to read issue 5, but maybe it's for free online. I have to take a look. And that is another option. Sometimes you can find these comics for free online. Maybe not legally, but actually, I think DC does probably release all these comics digitally. So you could probably find Prez without buying the original issues. But anyway, that's Prez number 4, the final of the regular series issues from, when is this from? Let's see. From 1974.